December 19th, 1944. 0. 6:15 hours. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann unwrapped the thin packet of dark bread and examined the quarter portion of horse-meat sausage that constituted his morning meal. Through the frozen mist, he could see the road where American convoys had passed just days before, leaving behind scattered equipment and supplies. He bit into the bread, its coarse texture grinding between his teeth as he chewed slowly to make it last. A younger soldier beside him held up a crumpled wrapper they had found in an abandoned American foxhole. "Look at this, Klaus. They throw away more food than we get in a day." Hartmann laughed, a sharp bark that echoed through the pine trees. The Americans and their abundance. They fight like they eat, with no discipline, no understanding of sacrifice. They will learn what real soldiers can do with so little. He had earned the right to such confidence. 3 years on the Eastern Front had forged him into something harder than the frozen ground beneath his boots. He had watched the Wehrmacht survive on almost nothing, had seen his comrades fight for weeks on bread and watery soup, had witnessed the impossible become routine through sheer will and discipline. The Americans, with their comfortable supplies and soft hands, would break when faced with men who knew how to endure. What Klaus Hartmann didn't know was that the wrapper his companion held had contained just one of 3 meals an American soldier would eat that day, and that those 3 meals together provided more calories than the entire German army could deliver to its frontline troops. He didn't know that American quartermasters had calculated every nutrient, every vitamin, every gram of protein down to scientific precision. He didn't know that what his army considered abundance, the Americans considered inadequate. Most importantly, he didn't know that the industrial and logistical machine that could deliver such rations to millions of men across 2 oceans would prove as decisive as any weapon on the battlefield. Hartmann's confidence was not baseless arrogance, but the product of experience. He had joined the Wehrmacht in 1939 and had marched through Poland, France, and into the Soviet Union as part of Army Group Center. In those early years, German rations had been adequate, sometimes even good. The standard field ration included 500 grams of bread, 150 grams of meat, and various supplements. It totaled approximately 3,000 calories, enough for a soldier under normal conditions. But those days belonged to a different war, a different Germany. By 1944, the ration situation had deteriorated dramatically. Official allocations had been reduced multiple times. The bread ration had dropped to 350 grams. Meat had become sporadic, often replaced by fish or nothing at all. The fat ration had been cut from 60 grams to 30. Vegetables arrived irregularly, usually in the form of dried or frozen turnips. Coffee had been replaced with ersatz, substitutes made from acorns or chicory. The theoretical daily calorie count had fallen to approximately 2,000, but that number represented an ideal that rarely materialized in the field. Soldiers like Hartmann had learned to adapt. They foraged, they bartered, they took from the land and from the enemy. In Russia, they had stripped farms bare. In France, they had requisitioned from local populations. On the Eastern Front, the policy had been explicit. Live off the land, take what you need, let the conquered starve. This was not cruelty but necessity in the German military doctrine. An army that could sustain itself through foraging was an army that required less from its overstretched supply lines. The German High Command had studied Napoleon's campaigns extensively. They understood that logistics could break an army faster than enemy fire. Their solution was to create soldiers who could fight effectively on minimal rations, who viewed hunger as another form of training, who took pride in their ability to endure what softer armies could not. This philosophy had worked in Poland, in France, in the early days of Barbarossa, when German armies raced forward faster than their supply chains. But now, in the winter of 1944, that same philosophy had become a chain around their necks. Hartmann weighed 158 pounds, down from 185 when the war began. Most of his comrades showed similar weight loss. Their uniforms hung loose. Their faces had hollowed out. They moved with the careful economy of men who knew that every calorie mattered, yet they told themselves this was strength, that their lean bodies were proof of their superior discipline, that the soft Americans would crumble when faced with real hardship. The intelligence reports reinforced this belief. German reconnaissance teams had captured American supply depots and documented what they found. Enormous quantities of food, varieties of rations, luxuries like cigarettes and coffee and chocolate. The reports noted this abundance with a mixture of envy and contempt. The American army moves like a traveling grocery store, one intelligence officer had written. They cannot fight without their comforts. When their supply lines break, they will break with them. This assessment seemed logical. Every military force in history had understood the principle. Lighter troops move faster. Endurance matters more than comfort. An army dependent on abundance is an army vulnerable to shortage. The German military had built its doctrine around mobility and efficiency. Why carry 3 days of rations when you could requisition food from conquered territory? Why burden soldiers with unnecessary weight when speed and firepower mattered more? Hartmann finished his meager breakfast and checked his equipment. His pack weighed perhaps 30 pounds, and half of that was ammunition. He carried no spare clothing, no unnecessary items, nothing that didn't serve an immediate tactical purpose. An American soldier, he had heard, carried 60 pounds or more. The thought made him shake his head. How could such burdened men maneuver? How could they fight when exhausted by their own supplies? The German military doctrine made perfect sense within its own framework. It had worked before, it would work again. The Americans would learn what the French had learned, what the British had learned, what the Russians were still learning, that the Wehrmacht could do more with less than any army in the world. What none of them understood was that the entire premise was wrong. The Americans weren't fighting despite their logistical abundance. They were fighting because of it. In the United States, while Hartmann and his comrades subsisted on bread and ersatz coffee, a revolution in military nutrition was reaching its peak. The effort had begun years before the war, when army quartermasters and civilian scientists had started asking a question that seemed almost naive in its simplicity. What if we actually calculated how much food a soldier needed? The answer required understanding metabolism at a level no military had previously attempted. Researchers at laboratories across the United States had measured caloric expenditure under different conditions. They had tested soldiers marching with full packs. They had monitored men digging foxholes. They had calculated the energy costs of carrying ammunition, of running, of fighting, of simply staying warm in cold weather. The numbers were precise and unforgiving. A soldier in moderate activity required approximately 3,500 calories per day. In cold weather, that number increased to 4,000. During heavy combat operations, with continuous movement and physical stress, requirements could spike to 4,500 calories or more. Below these thresholds, performance degraded measurably. Strength decreased. Reaction times slowed. Decision-making suffered. Immune systems weakened. Weight loss accelerated. An army running caloric deficits was an army eating itself. The American military had taken this science and built an entire logistics system around it. By 1944, American quartermasters were managing the most sophisticated food supply chain in human history. Every month, the United States shipped hundreds of thousands of tons of rations across both oceans. The C-ration, initially developed in 1938, had evolved through multiple iterations. Each contained 6 cans providing a complete day's nutrition: meat and beans, meat and vegetable hash, meat and spaghetti, ham and lima beans, chicken and vegetables, and frankfurters and beans. The combinations rotated to prevent monotony. Each ration included bread units, desserts, cigarettes, matches, chewing gum, toilet paper, and can openers. The total caloric content of a C-ration was 3,600 calories, not 3,600 as a goal, but 3,600 as a minimum standard, tested and verified in every batch. The protein content was measured, 3.5 ounces per day. The vitamin content was calculated, vitamin A, vitamin B1, vitamin C, all present in measured quantities. When field reports indicated that soldiers weren't consuming the lemon powder that provided vitamin C, the Quartermaster Corps reformulated the ration, adding vitamins to the candy and dropping the unpopular powder. But the C-ration was only one option. The K-ration, developed for airborne and mobile forces, contained 3 meals, totaling 2,830 calories, in a much more compact package. It included canned meat, crackers, fruit bars, chocolate, coffee, sugar, gum, and cigarettes. The D ration, a fortified chocolate bar, provided 1,200 calories in an emergency. The 5-in-1 ration fed 5 men for 1 day and included fresh items when possible. The 10-in-1 ration fed 10 men. The variety was staggering. American soldiers in the field could receive different rations on different days. They could trade items they didn't like. They could supplement from local sources if available. And because the baseline ration already met or exceeded caloric requirements, such supplements represented genuine abundance rather than desperate necessity. The production statistics revealed the scale of American commitment. In 1944 alone, American companies produced over 1 billion rations of all types. The H.J. Heinz Company operated facilities producing 50,000 C-rations per day. The Cracker Jack Company, known for caramel popcorn, retooled to produce K-rations. Hershey developed a high-temperature chocolate bar that wouldn't melt in tropical heat. Every major food producer in America had been mobilized for ration production. The logistics of distribution matched the scale of production. Liberty ships carried rations across the Atlantic by the shipload. Each Liberty ship could carry over 10,000 tons of cargo. In the Pacific, supply chains stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, yet rations arrived with such regularity that soldiers could afford to be selective about what they ate. The trash heaps behind American lines contained more food than German soldiers saw in weeks. This abundance had a purpose beyond simple nutrition. American military planners understood something that German doctrine had missed. Morale is a combat multiplier. A soldier who knows he will be fed, who can count on hot coffee in the morning and chocolate at night, who never has to worry whether the supply convoy will arrive, is a soldier who can focus entirely on fighting. Hunger is a distraction. Uncertainty is a weakness. The American supply system eliminated both. The first German soldiers to truly understand the disparity were those who captured American positions during the Battle of the Bulge. Hartmann's unit overran an American supply depot on December 20th, 1944. What they found stunned them into silence. Crates and crates of rations, not the meager allocations they knew, but stacks of boxes reaching higher than a man's head. Hartmann pried open a C-ration crate and found 36 units packed inside. He opened one unit. 6 cans, each labelled in English: meat and beans, biscuits, soluble coffee, sugar, hard candy, cigarettes. The cans were solid, heavy with real food. He used his bayonet to open the meat and beans. The smell that emerged made his stomach clench with sudden hunger. Real meat, real beans, real food. His comrades tore through the supplies. Men who had maintained iron discipline for years abandoned it in the face of such abundance. They ate until they were sick. They stuffed their pockets with chocolate. They fought over the cigarettes, American brands they had heard about but never seen. Some men wept as they ate. Others laughed with an edge of hysteria. The depot contained enough food to feed their entire battalion for weeks, and it was just one small supply point for one American unit. How? One soldier asked, holding up a can of ham and lima beans. How can they have so much? Hartmann had no answer. He sat among the crates, eating a chocolate bar, and felt something shift in his understanding of the war. This wasn't normal abundance. This wasn't even wasteful abundance. This was systematic, calculated, overwhelming abundance. The Americans had built an entire war machine around the assumption that their soldiers would be overfed rather than underfed. Similar scenes were playing out across multiple fronts. In Italy, German troops had captured American positions and found ration supplies that seemed inexhaustible. In France, Wehrmacht intelligence officers had documented American supply systems and written reports that their superiors refused to believe. They carry more food than ammunition, one report stated. Each soldier has rations for 3 days at all times. Resupply occurs daily. They discard what they don't want. The psychological impact accumulated slowly. German soldiers who had taken pride in their ability to fight on minimal rations began to understand what that really meant. They were starving while their enemies feasted. The Americans weren't soft because they ate well. They ate well because they could, because their nation could produce food on such a scale that even soldiers at the front line never went hungry. Intelligence assessments began to shift. A report dated January 5, 1945, from Army Group B headquarters stated, "American logistical capacity exceeds all previous estimates. Food supplies appear unlimited. Captured rations indicate daily caloric intake of approximately 4,000 calories per soldier, double our current allocation. This disparity affects morale and combat effectiveness. Soldiers increasingly reluctant to engage when food situation is discussed. The mathematics were devastating. An American soldier consuming 4,000 calories per day while performing the same tasks as a German soldier consuming 2,000 calories possessed a calculable advantage. He was stronger. He healed faster from wounds. He resisted disease more effectively. He could march farther, fight longer, and recover more quickly. Multiply that advantage across millions of soldiers over months and years, and it became as significant as any technological superiority. German military doctors began documenting the effects in medical reports. Average weight loss among frontline troops had reached 30 to 40 pounds. Cases of night blindness from vitamin A deficiency were increasing. Infections that should have healed became chronic. Minor wounds became major problems. Men in their 20s had the physical profiles of men 20 years older. The medical corps could do nothing because the problem wasn't medical but logistical. In prisoner of war camps, captured German soldiers experienced American rations for the first time as permanent reality rather than temporary windfall. The shock was profound. 3 meals a day, every day, with no variation in quantity or quality. Hot coffee at breakfast, real meat at dinner, chocolate for dessert. They gained weight. Their wounds healed. Their night blindness cleared up. Within weeks, they looked and felt healthier than they had in years. The psychological transformation was more disturbing than the physical. These men had been taught that German discipline and endurance represented military superiority. They had believed that the ability to fight while hungry, to endure on almost nothing, made them better soldiers than their enemies. Now they understood that their hunger had been a choice, but not their choice. Their leadership had chosen to field an army that starved while the enemy ate. The Americans hadn't struggled to match German efficiency. They had built a system so abundant that efficiency became irrelevant. Post-war interviews with Wehrmacht veterans revealed the depth of this realization. Hartmann survived the war and was interviewed in 1953 by American military historians. His testimony was blunt. "We told ourselves we were superior because we could endure hardship. We mocked the Americans for their abundance, but we were just hungry, and they were fed. That's all. We were hungry, and they were fed, and we pretended our hunger made us strong. By 1945, we knew the truth. A hungry army loses to a fed one. Always. Every time. We never had a chance." Documents discovered in German archives after the war revealed that High Command had understood the problem far earlier than frontline troops. A report from the Wehrmacht High Command, dated April 1943, stated, "American logistical capacity represents an asymmetric advantage against which we have no effective counter. Their ability to maintain high-calorie rations across multiple theaters simultaneously indicates industrial and agricultural production levels that exceed combined Axis capacity by a factor of 5 to 1 or more. This disparity affects not only current combat effectiveness, but long-term strategic sustainability. But this knowledge never translated into changed policy, because there was no policy that could address it. Germany couldn't match American food production. The Wehrmacht couldn't build supply chains that crossed oceans without interruption. The industrial base that could have supported such logistics had been committed to other priorities: tanks, planes, ammunition. The choice had been made implicitly from the beginning: firepower over food, mobility over sustainability, the tactical over the logistical. The final reckoning came in the war's last months. By March 1945, German rations had collapsed completely in many units. Frontline soldiers received bread and nothing else for days at a time. Some units received no rations at all and were told to forage. The American forces pushing into Germany encountered enemy soldiers who surrendered not because they were outfought, but because they were starving. A report from the United States First Army, dated April 10, 1945, described the condition of prisoners taken near the Ruhr. Physical examination reveals severe malnutrition in approximately 85% of captured personnel. Average weight is 135 pounds for men of average height. Many show symptoms of vitamin deficiency diseases. Several cases of scurvy confirmed. Prisoners consistently report receiving less than 1,000 calories per day for the past 2 months. When offered American rations, many became ill from overeating after extended deprivation. The statistical reality was overwhelming. From 1941 through 1945, the United States produced and distributed enough field rations to provide every American service member with full caloric requirements throughout the war. The total production, in the end, Klaus Hartmann's dismissive laughter that December morning in the Ardennes had represented the final moment before understanding. He had mocked American abundance without recognizing what it meant. He had seen their full supply depots and called it weakness without calculating what such logistics required. He had taken pride in his own hunger without understanding that hunger is not strength but the absence of it. The wrapper his companion had held, the one piece of trash from an American foxhole, contained more nutrition than many German soldiers received in an entire day. That single discarded item represented everything Hartmann didn't know. That America could produce food in quantities that made waste inevitable. That American industry operated at scales Germany couldn't match. That the logistical capacity to deliver 3 meals a day to millions of men across 2 oceans would prove as decisive as any weapon. Hartmann had been right about one thing. The Americans would learn what real soldiers could do with so little. But the lesson wasn't the one he expected. They learned that soldiers who had to do with so little, who fought hungry while their enemies were fed, who relied on endurance because abundance was denied them, would lose. They always lost, and they always would. The crushing irony was that German military doctrine had been built on historical examples of mobile, efficient armies, defeating slower, more cumbersome forces. But those examples predated industrial warfare, predated mechanized logistics, predated the understanding that in modern combat, the side that could feed its soldiers would defeat the side that could not. The Wehrmacht had prepared to fight the last war while America had invented a new form of warfare where abundance itself became a weapon. By war's end, the statistics told a story that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. American soldiers had maintained then exceeded 3 billion rations of all types. In contrast, German ration allocations decreased every year of the war, from adequate in 1939 to catastrophically insufficient by 1945. The comparison extended beyond mere calories. American rations included calculated vitamins and minerals. They provided variety to prevent monotony and maintain morale. They arrived with such regularity that soldiers could predict their meals days in advance. German soldiers, when they received rations at all, never knew if the next shipment would arrive or what it might contain. The technological implications were equally significant. The development of the C-ration had required advances in food preservation, packaging, and mass production. The K-ration's compact design had necessitated innovations in dehydration and compression. The logistics system that distributed these rations had required unprecedented coordination between military planners and civilian industry. Every element represented American industrial capacity applied to the single problem of keeping soldiers fed. German veterans, gathering at reunions in the 1950s and 60s, spoke openly about the ration disparity for the first time. They no longer framed it as a matter of discipline or endurance, but as what it had always been, a massive, unbridgeable material advantage. One veteran, Hans Möller of the 6th Panzer Division, said in 1962, "We convinced ourselves that our lean rations proved our superiority. The truth was simpler and more terrible. They could feed their soldiers, and we could not. That difference decided the war as much as tanks or planes, maybe more. The historical vindication was complete and undeniable. Every statistical analysis, every medical study, every logistical assessment reached the same conclusion. The American military's commitment to feeding its soldiers had provided a combat advantage that German forces could never overcome. The Wehrmacht had created an army that could endure hunger, but the United States had created an army that never had to. In their health and strength throughout the conflict, German soldiers had progressively weakened until they could barely function. The difference was food, systematically delivered, scientifically calculated, industrially produced in quantities that made victory inevitable. What Klaus Hartmann didn't know that December morning, as he laughed and ate his meager bread, would take him years to fully understand. But in 1953, interviewed in a quiet room by patient historians, he finally spoke the truth that had been hiding beneath all the propaganda and pride. They beat us with food, we starved, and they ate. And that decided everything.